Today, the 2nd of October 2025, the birth anniversary of Mahatma Gandhi, Gandhi Jayanti. On this day, as we remember the fountainhead of India's freedom, the question arises as to what we are doing with the great, matchless legacy that he has left for us. Have we proved faithful and grateful custodians of this great heritage, or have we just discarded it along the way? These are questions that should concern us a great deal, particularly given the phase through which India is passing through in its continuing self-evolution. In this video, I'll briefly reflect together with you what Gandhi means to me. I have to confess right at the outset that I'm deeply personally indebted to the Mahatma for the very positive, soul-enriching, empowering influence he exerted on me from a very early stage in my life. It's not that I've been able to become a true Gandhian. At least I have admired Gandhi from a distance and tried in my own very humble and halting fashion to emulate him, at least in certain respects of my life and the public service I rendered. So the first thing I have to do is to place on record my personal indebtedness to this great soul. As all of us remember, Gandhi was born on the 2nd of October, 1869. 1869. So if he were alive today, he would have been, what, 156 years old? Well, he is not with us, at least not in person. So that's Gandhi. When I think of Gandhi, the very first thought that comes to me, or when I ask myself the question, what does Gandhi mean to you? The first answer that comes to my mind is that Gandhi to me is a spiritual invitation. Let me repeat. Gandhi to me is a spiritual invitation. Spiritual invitation to be empowered. Because Gandhi has taught us that spirituality is the seed of freedom. It's extremely important for us to remember this. Those of us who are familiar with his autobiography under the title, The Story of My Experiments with Truth, would also recall his statement therein that all his political experiments were as nothing compared to the spiritual experiments he undertook. So for Gandhi, spirituality was a foundation on which he built everything. So therefore, I think I'm quite justified in saying that I experienced Gandhi first and foremost as a spiritual invitation. And wherever spirituality becomes real, genuine, and active, a passion for freedom is born. Short of that, people tend to shrink into slavery. Now, psychologists have taught us, particularly in the last century and a half, that the human mind, human nature, is horribly ambivalent. With one half of our mind, we love freedom. And with the other half of the mind, we still want to go back to slavery. The Bible, in its second book, the book of Exodus, actually, thousands of years before modern psychology was born, reveals this in a beautiful fashion. I can only make a passing reference here. If I take you to the book of Exodus, time will get out of hand. So, this ambivalence of human nature, poised as it is between the possibility of slavery and the hope of freedom, this ambivalence can be settled in favor of freedom only if human nature is given a spiritual orientation and foundation. That's actually the basic creed of the Mahatma. And therefore, he was not a politician cast in the familiar mold. He was a saint in politics, a saintly politician, Today, of course, we find it hard to believe that politicians can be saints or saints can have a place in politics, but Gandhi has taught us that if the welfare of a people and the freedom of a people are to be safe, then their leaders must have spiritual sensitivity, a sense of godliness, which alone is a secret of sincere love for the people. Now, therefore, what does this spiritual orientation involve, and how does this spirituality become a call to and an empowerment for freedom? That's the main subject of our inquiry from now onwards. Now, the very first thing I learned from Gandhi is that if you really want to enter the sphere of spirituality at all, the first thing you have to do is to liberate yourself from your slavery to religion. Because all religions tend to entrap you and keep you limited to the small, private, designated enclaves, which hinder your larger awareness, which fragment humanity into all kinds of alienated pieces, which corrupts human vision, which adulterates our feelings and our emotions, and ruins our sense of oneness as members of the human family. So while Gandhi was profoundly spiritual, he was not particularly religious. He did not waste his time visiting temples. And I remember reading in the story of my experiments with truth, Gandhi wondering why it is that the holiest cities in India are also the dirtiest. That's what he has an aside. Now, why does the shift from religion to spirituality awaken in us a passion for freedom? The essence of spirituality is godliness. That is to say, in the state of godliness, we look at everything, including ourselves, our circumstances, our duties, our opportunities, responsibilities, in light of what God wants us to do and to be. The alternative, of course, is to place the self in place of God and to look at everything in terms of self-aggrandizement, which corrupts both the individual and the society, makes the individual function in a manner that's harmful to the society and the larger cause. So the first thing that happens when we become truly godly is that our sense of responsibility widens, and we are able to escape the narrow limits of our selfish interests, and we happily, gladly, voluntarily identify ourselves with a larger cause, which perhaps in our context can be identified as a national cause. Not only that, when God becomes the center of our consciousness, and that's what godliness really means, God consciousness, we become positive towards everything. One aspect of becoming positive towards everything is to recognize the value of everything, particularly the value of those things to which the society and the prevailing culture would not attach any value. A case in point, a very obvious case in point, is the value that Gandhi and Gandhi alone attached to the poor. And he gave them the very dignified, honorable name of Harijan. Harijan means God's own people. Why did he do so? That's the best way to communicate to the Indian mind, the Indian sensibility, that the poor have tremendous worth in the sight of God. They're God's own people, God's own children. And therefore, they should not be neglected, they should not be ill-treated, brutalized, exploited, so on and so forth. Even today, we have not come even the halfway mark towards recognizing the spiritual revolution involved in recognizing the poor as Harijan. So, the second aspect of Gandhi's positivity was his inner freedom to accept what is good and beautiful and true from every source possible. That's why he said, there are 1,000 windows open on our minds. Rather than keeping our minds closed, shutting ourselves out from the good things that humanity has gathered in the course of its journey through history, what we do is to gladly welcome from all quarters, from every direction, the good and beautiful things that people have discovered in the past, and we should allow ourselves to be continually enriched and nourished, values, ideas nourished by all these sources. That is why Gandhi was equally positive to all other religions as he was to Hinduism. As he once said, I'm as good a Christian as I'm a Hindu, as good a Muslim as I'm a Hindu, and so on and so forth. In other words, Gandhi, unlike some of the religious bigots of our times, who equate religious bigotry with patriotism, something that Gandhi would have violently disapproved, vigorously disapproved, if not violently, Gandhi believed that true freedom means the inner freedom to benefit from the best that is taught and known in the world. Unfortunately, that kind of freedom, that's actually the essence of spiritual freedom, is today criminalized. It is deemed an act of disloyalty to your own religious tradition if you even dare to recognize something beautiful in some other tradition. And this problem is particularly acute in my community, the Christian community, wherein everybody feels that a faithful Christian is one who ardently believes without any foundation whatsoever that all other people other than Christians, and among Christians, each sect believes that its own members alone will go to heaven, all others are destined for the warmer hospitality of hell. Now, Gandhi would certainly not accept that point of view. Rather than see others in terms of their demerits, he insisted on seeing them in terms of what is good and beautiful and positive and true about them. And I certainly endorse that approach rather than this sectarian, parochial, negative, and pathological outlook. Gandhi not only welcomed the best from various spiritual traditions, but also welcomed the best from the Western secular intellectual tradition. In fact, if you read the Hindu Swaraj, which interestingly is very remarkable in the sense that it's a book that Gandhi started writing as he began his sea voyage from London, and he finished it by the time he reached South Africa. And he wrote at such a furious pace that when his right hand got tired, he started writing with his left hand. It's a book that I very strongly recommend to everyone. But towards the end of that book, Gandhi gives a list of the books that influenced him. It's very interesting. Please look that up and see to what extent Gandhi was positive and open towards the best that the West produced in terms of liberal thought. So Gandhi's inner freedom is something that I would commend particularly to all young people. The second aspect of Gandhi's spiritual freedom was his commitment to non-violence, which is actually truth in action. And truth always means love for life. So in Gandhi's doctrine of ahimsa, which he enunciated while he was in South Africa, is not just a simple idea of the adjuration of violence or the renunciation of violence. It's a far more comprehensive and profound idea, which is a complex of various ideas like commitment to truth, respect for life, and, as I've already stated, an attitude of positivity and inner freedom so that we discover and welcome what is good and positive about others. So Gandhi knew that merely saying that, I'm committed to truth, as we today say, after all, that's our national motto, Satyam Eva Jayate Nanurudam. The motto stays there, but the country goes in the direction of untruths. Today we have very gleefully embraced the politics of untruth, post-truth politics. And the motto remains unchanged, but everything else in the country has changed. So Gandhi would say that this affinity to untruth, affinity to falsehood, is an index of our inner corruption. If you are corrupt inwardly, you cannot have a genuine love for or attach any value for truth. Rather, you will consider truth to be a nuisance and a hindrance. And therefore, if you're really committed to knowing, pursuing, upholding truth, then you have to purify yourself. And all of us know to what extent Gandhi went in maintaining his purity He undertook his fast mainly to purify himself. And that particular insight is absolutely true and eternally valid. That if we want to really stay committed to truth, we have to preserve our inner life in all its purity. Any inner purity will breed allergy to truth and affinity to untruths. The third aspect of the spiritual personality of Jesus Christ, spiritual personality of Mahatma Gandhi. In my thinking, I cannot separate Gandhi from Jesus Christ, and I don't apologize for it. The third aspect of his spiritual personality is his spiritual idea of service. Gandhi sincerely believed that a spiritually enlightened person will find selfless service as a reward in itself. He believed that selfless service afforded the highest return or reward of unalloyed joy. And he also believed that that was the best way to please and honor or worship God. And Gandhi believed, and I also believe with him, that merely worshipping God with our mouth is actually insincere, hypocritical, and therefore it's an insult to God, for God is truth. Gandhi believed that God was truth and truth was God, and therefore he knew, and in this, of course, he is in the company of Jesus Christ, who said, the Son of Man has come not to be served, but to serve. So Jesus Christ before Gandhi enunciated the spirituality and the dignity of service, and emphasized the fact that true godliness expresses itself through selfless, sincere, dedicated service. And that the sincerity of that service is proved by the complete renunciation of any expectation of reward, in which Gandhi was influenced not only by Jesus Christ, but also by the Gita, the doctrine in the Gita of Nishkama Karma. Jesus Christ embodied the ideal of selfless service, where he said that the foxes have their holes, the birds in there have their nests, but the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head. That's voluntary poverty. That at the heart of that voluntary poverty is selfless service, rendering service to others without any heed as to what might be the reward. In fact, distancing oneself from reward altogether, which becomes in the Gita the doctrine of Nishkama Karma. So there is a meeting point between Jesus Christ and the Hindu spirituality as far as the spirituality of service is concerned. But unfortunately, again, in the Indian context, irrespective of the sublime spiritual notions, the actual reality on the ground is that the spirit of service is slighted. And in fact, those who served are looked down upon, and those who are being served as considered noble people. For example, if you're a person making a pair of shoes, you're a mochi, and you become an untouchable. But the person who wears the shoes that you make with leather, he becomes a nobleman. That's a kind of contradiction and hypocrisy that flourishes on the ground, whereas the philosophical spiritual insight is to the contrary. So I again reiterate my position that there is a meeting point between the spiritual vision of Lord Krishna as enunciated in the Gita and the vision of Jesus Christ as stated in the Gospels. So where the spirit of selfless service is absent, that space is taken up by the greed of self-glorification. What you see today in Indian politics is not the spirituality of service, but the madness, the insanity of self-glorification, to the extent that people give themselves the airs of being gods. They disdain to believe that they are of biological origin like the rest of us. Gandhi never claimed such distinctions. Rather, he deemed himself as a humble instrument in the hand of God to lead the people of India to freedom. That's very different from saying that I am not of biological origin and I am specially designed by the Paramatma, commissioned, anointed, and sent to function on behalf of the Paramatma. So, uh, finally, in the interest of brevity, I shall not include any more than this. Finally, the spiritual personality of Jesus Christ expressed itself in the most unmistakable, authentic fashion. So, the extreme simplicity of life that he embraced. In fact, the moment spirituality dawned within Gandhi, the love for a simple way of life also was born. This, of course, confused the white man, the keepers of the British Raj, at the helm of which was Winston Churchill at that time, who was so bamboozled, befuddled at the sight of this man who stood as a symbolic rebuke to the elaborate luxuries of the British Empire, luxuries afforded by exploitation and tyranny. It so provoked Churchill that he dared to describe the Mahatma as the half-naked fakir of India. So, simplicity of life. Now, opposite to that is greed. We know that globalization has actually deified greed. The modern God is greed. And see what has happened all over. Today, people sit and wonder why dictatorship and tyranny has become, or are threatening to become, the way of the political destiny of humankind, particularly in the Western Hemisphere, but not merely in the Western Hemisphere, but everywhere. My dear friends, the answer is very simple. If you were to ask Gandhi, he would say, well, the answer lies in the greed that's taken hold of each one of us. Everybody is infected with this political disease worse than COVID-19, called greed. What happens when greed takes possession of us? Greed makes us mercenaries. Please understand, it's a terrible problem. Greed makes us mercenaries. And a mercenary is one who is willing to sell himself in return for material gains, money, position, acknowledgement, whatever. If a nation becomes a nation of mercenaries, then the people there do not merit freedom. Nobody needs to come and take away their freedom. No external conqueror needs to come and make a conquest and consign the people once again to slavery. They will do it themselves. They will create their own manacles, their own chains of unfreedom. And they will use their political freedom, the freedom of franchise, to elect such leaders as would make a mockery of their freedom. And the more they tyrannize over them, the more grateful the people feel, because inwardly they are mercenaries. All that they care for is how much they get, either in real terms or in terms of illusory hopes. So one thing is absolutely clear. If you're a Gandhian, you will understand it. Or if you have a modicum of common sense, again, you will understand it. Greed and freedom cannot coexist. A people who merit freedom, or a people who want to merit freedom, necessarily will have to overcome greed. And if you don't overcome greed, then you will elaborate your lifestyle. There will be no end to your needs and your luxuries. You confuse your needs, luxuries for your needs, and your desires go multiplying. And ultimately, you sell yourself in order to appease your insatiable thirst for more and more luxuries, of which there shall be no end. There is tremendous power and the guarantee of freedom in the simplicity of lifestyle. Now, our Prime Minister today recommends Atmanirbhar Bharat. That's again a virtue that Mahatma Gandhi, or a discipline, not a virtue, a discipline that Mahatma Gandhi recommended. He tried to inculcate this discipline of self-reliance, of Atmanirbhar Bharat, in every Indian. At the heart of that was the emphasis on simplicity of lifestyle. The Prime Minister can preach Atmanirbhar Bharat and travel in a Boeing 777, which cost 4,000 crores of rupees, and cover himself with luxurious items brought in from other countries. Compare and contrast that with the simplicity of life that Gandhi preached with his body, the naked body. But the point is this, and that's the most important point that I want to make. If you really want to embrace simplicity of life, you have to grow in your stature, develop all your capacities to the full, including your intellectual and spiritual capacities. You must become a person of great substance in yourself. It is when you feel that you're hollow, empty, and cheap within yourself that you come under this imperious need, undeniable need, irresistible need to cover yourself with luxury. Because there is nothing of worth within yourself, therefore, there should be everything of worth all around you. And from that kind of approach, that in that state of life, you can't embrace Atmanirbharta or self-reliance. So, Prime Minister Modi perhaps does not realize that recommending Atmanirbhar Bharat on the basis of increasing consumerism but of domestic origin is an absolute contradiction in terms. Self-reliance is possible only if the people as a whole, including their leaders, embrace simplicity of life. Today, the Atmanirbhar Bharat that Modi is recommending is being recommended for the benefit of the industrial captains, the moneyed people, the billionaires of India. You buy more and more of the goods they manufacture, boycott items from outside. The question, of course, remains where do these captains of industry get their technology? Take mobile, for example. Is the technology Indian? Are the parts Indian? To what extent? So this is not Atmanirbharta. If you really want to become self-reliant, you have to embrace simplicity of life. That's what Gandhi has taught me. And I've practiced it. And I still practice it. And I'm proud that my simplicity of life, or the simplicity of my life, is a secret of my freedom. I don't have to fear anyone because I don't have to depend on anyone. If you lead a simple life, you don't have to depend on anyone. If you overcome your desires, your greed, your covetousness, your thirst for luxury, then you can afford to stand upright without flinching before anyone. That is a mark of freedom. And that's what I've learned from not only Gandhi, but also Jesus Christ. So, on this day, as we remember the Mahatma, let's also take pride in the fact that even as we Indians have nearly forgotten the Mahatma, the global community has not. Ironically, Mahatma Gandhi is valued, respected, revered, and emulated more by people other than Indians and outside of India than within India. In India, the Mahatma is becoming increasingly an object of ridicule. There are people who believe that Gandhi was responsible for all the evils that befell this country. There are people who believe that the man who killed him, Nathuram Vinayak Godse, should be the father of India. Now, all these things are very significant shifts in the very foundation of our nationhood. So these are things that we need to take seriously, but also understanding why such a shift is happening is also important. Again, for want of time, I cannot go any further than I already have. I close my reflections with you, wishing all of you a very meaningful, spiritually sound, spiritually vibrant Gandhi Jayanti. सबको सन्मति दे भगवान।